2 years had passed since the emergency pod carrying Park Jae-min had crashed on Kepler 442b, and the man who climbed out of his crude shelter each morning was no longer the same person who had arrived. The acid rain had left permanent scars on his face and hands, but his eyes burned with a fierce intelligence that had not been there before. He moved through the hostile environment like he had been born there, reading the patterns of the storms and the behavior of the creatures as easily as others read books. His first real shelter had been nothing more than a cave lined with electromagnetic residue to keep the shadow hunters away. Now he lived in a fortress built from the wreckage of crashed ships that had been accumulating on the planet for decades. Every piece of metal, every fragment of technology, every scrap of useful material had been carefully collected and repurposed into something new. The fortress was a marvel of engineering that combined human ingenuity with alien technology in ways that neither species had ever imagined. The walls were made from hull plating taken from Valari scout ships and reinforced with crystalline structures from Zephyrian mining equipment. The power systems were a hybrid of human electronics and alien energy cells that could channel the planet's constant lightning storms into usable electricity inside the fortress. Jae-min had created workshops and laboratories where he spent his days, reverse engineering the technology of the various species whose exiles had died on this world. Each crashed ship told a story of beings who had tried to fight the planet instead of understanding it. The granite people had built massive bunkers that were eventually worn down by the acid rain. The plasma beings had tried to overpower the storms with their own energy and had been consumed by electrical feedback. The crystal folk had attempted to terraform small areas and had been overwhelmed by the planet's hostile ecosystem, but Jae-min had learned to work with the planet instead of against it. He had discovered that the constant storms were not random chaos, but followed predictable patterns based on the planet's magnetic field and the positions of its 3 moons. By mapping these patterns, he could predict where lightning would strike and position his collection arrays to capture the maximum amount of energy. The shadow hunters had become his primary workforce. These creatures that had once hunted him now followed his commands with an intelligence that surprised even him. They were natural miners with claws that could dig through rock and an instinctive understanding of the planet's geology. Under his direction, they had excavated vast underground chambers where he stored his growing collection of technology and resources. The relationship had started with simple trades. He would provide them with the electromagnetic residue they seemed to crave, and they would bring him rare metals from deep underground. But as time passed, the arrangement had evolved into something more complex. The shadow hunters had their own social hierarchy, and by earning the respect of their pack leaders, Jae-min had essentially become part of their extended family. Communication with them was still limited, but he had learned to recognize their different calls and gestures. They had warning signals for dangerous weather patterns, hunting calls for when they found useful resources, and what he could only describe as greeting sounds for when they were happy to see him. In return, he had developed a system of hand signals and electrical pulses that allowed him to give them complex instructions. The stormwings had become his eyes and ears across the planet. These flying creatures could cover vast distances in a single day, and their electrical senses allowed them to detect things that would be invisible to human eyes. They brought him information about new crash sites, about dangerous weather, patterns forming in distant areas, and about the movements of other predators that might threaten his growing domain. But the most important discovery had come from the deepest excavations. Far beneath the planet's surface, where even the shadow hunters were reluctant to go, Jae-min had found something that changed everything. The remains of an ancient civilization that had once called this world home. The ruins were unlike anything he had ever seen. The architecture was fluid and organic, as if the buildings had been grown rather than built. The technology was so advanced that he could barely understand its basic principles. But what fascinated him most was how perfectly adapted it was to the planet's hostile environment. These ancient beings had not fought the storms and the acid rain and the dangerous creatures. They had built their civilization around them, using the planet's own energy and resources in ways that made them part of the ecosystem rather than separate from it. Their cities had been living things that grew and changed with the seasons, drawing power from the lightning and nutrients from the toxic soil. The civilization had been destroyed by some kind of cosmic disaster long before any of the current galactic species had even developed space travel. But their technology remained waiting for someone with the intelligence and patience to unlock its secrets. J-Min had found data storage devices that contained thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about the planet's ecology, its resources, and the advanced sciences needed to thrive in such a hostile environment. Learning to access this information had taken months of careful experimentation. The storage devices were activated by bioelectric fields similar to those generated by living creatures, but they required a specific combination of electrical patterns to unlock. Through trial and error, and with the help of the Stormwings, who naturally generated the right kind of electrical signals, he had finally gained access to the ancient archives. What he learned changed his understanding of everything. Kepler 442b was not just a death world. It was one of the most resource-rich planets in the galaxy. The constant storms had concentrated rare elements in easily accessible surface deposits. The acid rain had dissolved valuable minerals from deep underground and brought them to the surface. The hostile ecosystem had evolved complex biological processes that could be harnessed to create technologies far more advanced than anything the current galactic civilizations possessed. The ancient inhabitants had not been destroyed by the planet's hostility. They had been wiped out by visitors from space who had seen their advanced technology and decided to take it by force. The cosmic disaster that had ended their civilization had been war. A war that had left the planet apparently lifeless and hostile to prevent anyone else from claiming its treasures. But the hostility was not permanent. It was a defense mechanism that would gradually fade as the planet healed from the ancient wounds. The process would take thousands of years without intervention, but with the right knowledge and technology it could be accelerated dramatically. J-Min began implementing the ancient techniques on a small scale. He created biomechanical systems that could neutralize the acid rain in localized areas. He developed hybrid technologies that combined human engineering with alien innovation and ancient wisdom to create solutions that none of the three approaches could achieve alone. Most importantly, he learned to think of the planet not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a partner in creating something new. His growing city, which he had named New Sol after Earth's capital, became a testament to this new approach. The buildings were living structures that grew from the planet's own materials and drew power from its storms. The streets were lined with hybrid plants that could thrive in the toxic environment, while producing oxygen and filtering the air. The defensive systems were based on the planet's own creatures, trained and directed rather than replaced by mechanical alternatives. The Shadow Hunters had become his citizens, moving through the city's tunnels and carrying out complex tasks with the kind of intelligence that made him wonder if they had always been capable of such things, or if his influence had somehow awakened dormant abilities. The Stormwings patrolled the skies in organized formations, serving as both scouts and defenders of the growing settlement. But perhaps most importantly, J-Min had learned to see the bigger picture. This was not just about surviving on a hostile world. This was about proving that intelligence and adaptability could overcome any challenge. The Galactic Council had sent him here to die, but instead he had built something that none of their advanced civilizations had ever achieved. He had created a true partnership between different species and different ways of thinking. The man who had once been in exile was now the ruler of a kingdom that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. And he was just getting started. The real test was still to come, because he knew that eventually the galaxy would come looking for him. And when they did, they would find that the Death World had given birth to something entirely new, something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The emergency pod screamed through Kepler 442b's atmosphere like a falling star wrapped in flames. Inside the cramped metal coffin, Park J-Min gripped his safety harness so tight his knuckles turned white as the pod spun and tumbled through the storm clouds. Lightning struck the pod's hull again and again, filling The small space with the smell of burning metal and ozone dot through the tiny porthole. He could see flashes of the world below, and what he saw made his stomach turn. The entire planet's surface was covered in dark storms that never seemed to end. Purple lightning danced between black clouds that looked thick enough to walk on. The ground, when he could see it, was nothing but jagged rocks and deep canyons filled with swirling mist. The pod's computer kept saying the same thing over and over in a calm voice that made everything worse. Landing sequence initiated. Survival probability 12%. Emergency supplies will last 72 hours. Good luck, J-Min laughed, but there was no humor in it. 72 hours to figure out how to survive on a world that had killed everyone else who had ever been sent. Here. He had been a military engineer for 15 years and had survived in hostile environments from the frozen moons of Jupiter to the burning deserts of Mars, but this was different. This was a world designed by nature itself to kill anything that dared to live on it. The pod hit the ground with a crash that rattled his teeth and filled his mouth with the taste of blood. For a moment, everything was silent except for the hissing of damaged systems and the steady drumming of rain on the hull. Then the real nightmare began. The emergency hatch opened with a soft click, and immediately the pod began filling with a greenish mist that burned his eyes and throat. The rain was acid. Not just a little bit acidic, but strong enough to eat through metal and flesh if he stayed exposed too long. His emergency suit would protect him for maybe an hour before the acid ate through the protective coating. He grabbed his survival pack and emergency shelter and stumbled out into hell. The ground under his feet was slippery with some kind of organic slime that glowed faintly in the darkness. The air was thick with moisture and strange smells that made his nose burn. Somewhere in the distance he could hear sounds that might have been animals or might have been the planet itself groaning under the weight of the eternal storms. The emergency shelter was designed to withstand extreme conditions, but as soon as he set it up, the acid rain began eating through the waterproof coating. Within hours he could see small holes appearing in the fabric. By morning the shelter would be useless. That was when he saw them, eyes watching him from the darkness. Nah. 2 eyes or 4, but dozens of them glowing like green stars in the shadows between the rocks. They moved like liquid shadow flowing from one hiding place to another, always just at the edge of his vision. The shadow hunters. He had read about them in the brief survival guide the aliens had given him. Spider-like creatures the size of large dogs with razor-sharp claws and the ability to see in complete darkness. They hunted in packs, and their favorite prey was anything that moved during the storms. The guide had said they were responsible for killing more exiles than any other creature on the planet, but as J-Min watched them, he began to notice something the guide had not mentioned. They were not just mindless predators. They moved with purpose and intelligence. When lightning struck the ground near them, they would scatter in specific patterns, always avoiding certain areas. There was a method to their movement, something that suggested they understood their environment better than any simple animal should. The first attack came at dawn when the storms were at their worst. 3 shadow hunters emerged from the rocks, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Their claws scraped against stone as they surrounded his dying shelter. J-Min had his emergency weapon ready, but he knew it would not be enough. The creatures were too fast, and there were too many of them, but something strange happened. Just as they prepared to strike, a massive bolt of lightning hit the ground between them, and the creatures fled. Not just moved away, but actually ran as if they were terrified. J-Min looked at the spot where the lightning had struck and saw that the rock was covered in a thin layer of metallic residue that glowed with a faint blue light. He spent the next week collecting that residue. Every time lightning struck, he would wait for the creatures to flee, then venture out to scrape the metallic coating from the rocks. It was dangerous work that left him exhausted and covered in burns from the acid rain, but slowly he began to understand. What he had discovered, the metallic residue, was not just metal. It was some kind of electromagnetic field generator that interfered with the creature's ability to sense their prey. The shadow hunters hunted by detecting the electrical activity in living things, but the residue created a kind of static that blinded them. If he could collect enough of it, he could create a barrier that would keep them away. Building the barrier took 2 weeks and nearly killed him 3 times. He had to venture out during the worst storms to collect the residue when the lightning was most active. The acid rain ate through 2 more emergency suits and left permanent scars on his hands and face. But when he was finished, he had created something that no exile had ever managed before. A safe zone on the surface of a death world. The Shadow Hunters tested his barrier for days, probing for weaknesses, but they could not cross it. For the first time since landing, Jae-min allowed himself to sleep for more than a few minutes at a time. But safety was only the first step. He still needed food and water, and both were almost impossible to find on this nightmare world. The edible plants grew in the most dangerous areas, always in places where the flying predators called stormwings nested. These creatures were like flying sharks with wings made of living electricity. They could sense the bioelectric field of any living thing from miles away, and they attacked anything that moved during the storms. But again, Jae-min noticed something that others had missed. The stormwings were not just killing machines. They built nests from metal scraps and arranged them in complex patterns that suggested intelligence. They had a social structure with clear hierarchies, and they seemed to be protecting something, rather than just hunting for sport. It took him 3 weeks to figure out what they were protecting. Eggs, the stormwings, were parents defending their young. Once he understood that, everything changed. Instead of trying to fight them or sneak past them, he began to study them. He learned their patrol patterns, their warning calls, their behavioral quirks. He started leaving offerings of metal scraps near their nests, not to bribe them, but to show respect. The breakthrough came when he found an injured stormwing chick that had fallen from its nest during a particularly violent storm. The creature was dying, its electric wings flickering weakly as it lay among the rocks. Every instinct told him to stay away, but instead he carefully picked it up and carried it to safety. For hours he worked to save the creature using his engineering knowledge to repair its damaged bioelectric organs. It was like performing surgery on a living lightning bolt, but somehow he managed to stabilize its condition. When the parent stormwing found him, he was sure he was about to die. Instead, the massive creature landed nearby and watched as Jae-min fed its chick and helped it learn to fly again. When the chick was strong enough to return to the nest, the parent did something unprecedented. It brought him food. Not just any food, but the rare, nutritious plants that grew in the most dangerous areas of the planet. From that day forward, the stormwings became his allies. They would warn him of approaching dangers and help him find food and shelter. They even began bringing him information about the planet's hidden resources. Through a combination of simple gestures and electrical signals, he slowly learned to communicate with them. By the end of his 3rd month on Kepler 442b, Jae-min had accomplished something that no exile in the planet's history had ever managed. He had not just survived, but had begun to thrive. The death world was slowly becoming his home, and the creatures that were supposed to kill him were becoming his friends, but he was just getting started. The real work was about to begin. The massive metal doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep rumbling sound that made the floor shake beneath Kang Ho's feet. He walked slowly into the enormous room, trying to keep his back straight and his head high, even though his heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. The ceiling stretched so high above him that he could barely see the top, and the walls were covered in strange symbols that glowed with soft blue light. 12 different alien species sat in a giant circle around him, each one more terrifying than the last. Their seats were built high above the floor so they could look down at him like he was nothing more than a bug they were about to step on. The air smelled strange, like metal, and something sweet that made his nose burn. In the center of the circle stood a tall, blue-skinned creature with 4 arms and eyes that looked like black holes. This was Dexmar, the leader of the Velari race and the most powerful being in the known galaxy. When he spoke, his voice was like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Human Ambassador Kang Ho," Dexmar said, each word falling like a hammer blow. "You stand accused of representing the most dangerous species ever encountered by civilized worlds." Kang Ho felt his throat go dry, but he forced himself to speak. "Respected council members, my people come in peace. We only want to learn from you and share knowledge with other species. We have never attacked anyone without cause. A sound like angry bees filled the chamber as the alien representatives began talking to each other in their own languages. The insect-like Zephyrian delegate clicked its mandibles together, making a sound like breaking glass. The rock-like granite people representative's voice rumbled like an earthquake. The energy beings from the plasma worlds flickered with angry red light. Without cause, repeated a creature that looked like a walking tree with too many eyes. Your species has expanded to 47 star systems in less than 100 years. You build weapons that can destroy planets. You fight wars among yourselves even as you reach for the stars. You are like a disease, added another alien whose body was made of living crystal spreading faster than anything we have ever seen. Soon you will want our worlds, our resources, our technology. Kang-ho shook his head desperately. No, that's not true. Humans are explorers, yes, but we are not conquerors. We want to join the galactic community, not destroy it. The chamber fell silent except for the humming of the energy beings. Dexmar raised one of his 4 hands, and suddenly holographic images filled the air around Kang-ho. He saw human warships from Earth's history, battles between nations, nuclear weapons, exploding cities burning. His heart sank as he realized they had been watching humanity for much longer than anyone on Earth had known. Your own history betrays your words, Dexmar said. War after war, destruction after destruction. Even now, as you reach for the stars, your people fight over resources and territory on your home world. That's our past, Kang-ho said, his voice getting stronger. We learn from those mistakes. That's why we created the United Earth Government. We stopped fighting each other so we could work together. For now, clicked the Zephyrian. But what happens when resources become scarce? What happens when you meet a species that will not bow to your demands? More images appeared in the air showing human colonies mining asteroids, human factories processing raw materials, human ships carrying goods between star systems. To Kang-ho, it looked like progress, like humanity finally working together to build something better. But he could see from the aliens' reactions that they saw something else entirely. You consume, said the crystal being, like locusts you take, and take until nothing remains. You multiply, added the tree creature. Your population grows faster than any species we have studied. You adapt, said another alien whose body seemed to be made of flowing liquid. You change your technology, your tactics, your very biology to survive in any environment. The way they said it made these sound like crimes instead of achievements. Kang-ho realized with growing horror that humanity's greatest strengths were exactly what made these aliens afraid of them. We have seen species like yours before, the mayor continued. Always they promise peace, always they claim they only want to coexist, and always they end up destroying everything they touch. The destroyer wars, whispered the energy beings, and suddenly the air in the chamber felt cold. The plague of worlds, the great consuming all, caused by species that claim to come in peace. Kang-ho felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He was not just speaking for himself or even for Earth's current government. He was speaking for every human who would ever live, and these aliens had already decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to survive. What do you want from U.S.? He asked quietly. Isolation, Dexmar said immediately. Your species will return to your home system and remain there. You will have no contact with the galactic community. You will develop no faster than light travel. You will expand no further. And if we refuse, the silence that followed was more frightening than any threat could have been. Finally, Dexmar spoke again, and his voice was like the sound of stars dying. Then your species will be removed from the galaxy permanently. Kang-ho felt his knees go weak, but he forced himself to keep standing. There must be another way. Some kind of test or trial to prove that humanity can be trusted. The aliens looked at each other, and for a moment he thought he saw something like curiosity in their strange eyes. Then Dexmar smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Kang-ho had ever seen. Very well, the Valari leader said. We will give your species one chance to prove themselves. Hope flared in Kang-ho's chest. What kind of test? We will take one human. Dexmar explained, one representative of your species, and place them on Kepler 442b. The name meant nothing to Kanho, but he could see the other aliens reacting with what looked like approval mixed with dark amusement. "What is Kepler 442b?" he asked. "A world where we send those who have failed us." "Click the Zephyrian, a world where the weak die and the strong barely survive." "A death world," added the crystal being, "where we have sent the worst criminals and the most dangerous exiles for 1,000 years. No species has ever survived there for more than a few months," said the tree creature. "Most die within days." Vexmar's smile grew wider. "If your human survives for 1 full year and builds something more than a simple shelter, then we will consider allowing your species to join the galactic community. And if they fail, then Earth will be sterilized and humanity will be remembered only as another species that proved too dangerous to live." Kangho felt the trap closing around him and around his entire species. This was not really a test, it was an execution with extra steps. But what choice did he have? The alternative was the immediate destruction of Earth and everyone on it. "I accept," he said, and the words felt like signing his own death warrant. "Excellent." Vexmar said, "We have already chosen your representative, Lieutenant Commander Park J. Min, a military engineer with survival training." Kangho's blood ran cold. "You've already chosen. Who gave you the right?" "We have been watching your species." "For decades," Vexmar replied, "we know which of your people might have the best chance of surviving. We chose him because he represents the best of human adaptability and stubbornness." "When does he leave?" "He left this morning," Vexmar said, and Kangho felt the floor drop out from under him. "His ship will reach Kepler 442b in 3 days. You will remain here as our guest until we know the results," as guards moved to escort him from the chamber. Kangho realized that somewhere in space, a man he had never met was traveling toward a world designed to kill him, carrying the hopes and fears of every human who had ever lived. The fate of humanity now rested in the hands of one soldier who did not even know that his survival would determine whether his species lived or died. The chamber doors closed behind him with a sound like thunder, and Kangho found himself praying to whatever gods might be listening that Park Jae-min was as tough as the aliens seemed to think he was. 5 years after Park Jae-min had crashed on Kepler 442b, the long-range sensors he had built from salvaged alien technology detected something that made his blood run cold. Ships were approaching the planet. Not just one or two, but an entire fleet of vessels representing multiple species from the Galactic Council. He stood in the command center of New Sol, watching the displays that showed the incoming fleet, and felt a mixture of excitement and dread. He had known this day would come eventually. The Council had sent him here to die, and they would want to confirm that their sentence had been carried out. What they would find instead would challenge everything they thought they knew about death, worlds, and about humanity. The lead ship was a Velari heavy cruiser, its sleek blue hull gleaming even in the dim light of Kepler 442b's storm-shrouded sky. Behind it came vessels from 6 other species, each one representing a different approach to technology and warfare. But what caught Jae-min's attention was the smaller scout ship that separated from the main fleet and began descending toward the planet's surface. Through his network of Stormwing scouts, he could see the ship's occupants clearly. The pilot was Velari, but there was something different about him. His skin had the characteristic blue tint of his species, but his facial features were more angular, more human-like. A hybrid. The Council had sent someone with human blood to investigate. What had happened to their exile? The scout ship landed at the designated coordinates that Jae-min had transmitted to them. Not in some random clearing or crash site, but in the middle of what had once been considered the most dangerous area of the planet. The landing pad was carved from living rock and powered by captured lightning. Automated defense systems that could disable ships without destroying them surrounded the area. And watching over it all from the towers of New Sol were creatures that the galaxy had written off as mindless predators. Captain Heinsu stepped out of his ship and immediately reached for his breathing apparatus. Every briefing he had received told him that the atmosphere of Kepler 442b was toxic to most forms of life. But as he tested the air, he found something impossible. It was breathable. Not just barely tolerable, but actually pleasant, with a clean, fresh quality that reminded him of mountain air on His home world, the landing pad, was unlike anything in the galaxy. The surface was smooth as glass, but had an organic quality that suggested it had been grown rather than built. Channels carved into the rock directed rainwater away from the landing area, and he could see that the liquid was clear and clean, not the acid rain that was supposed to cover the planet. Strange plants grew in carefully tended gardens, their leaves shimmering with colors that seemed to shift and change in the light, but what truly amazed him were the creatures. Shadow hunters moved through the area with purpose and intelligence, carrying out tasks that required planning and coordination. They showed no fear of the alien visitors, but they also made no aggressive moves. Instead, they seemed to be following some kind of protocol, as if they had been trained for this exact situation. Above them, stormwings circled in formation, their electrical wings, creating patterns of light against the dark sky. These creatures that were supposed to be mindless predators were clearly communicating with each other and with something else, someone else. "Welcome to New Sol," came a voice from behind him, and Captain Hyansu spun around to see a figure emerging from what looked like a solid rock wall. The man was clearly human, but changed by his years on the Death World. His skin was marked with scars from acid rain, and his eyes held a depth of knowledge that spoke of hard-won wisdom. But there was something else in those eyes: authority, power, the confidence of someone who had taken the worst the galaxy could throw at him and had not just survived, but thrived. "You must be Park Jae-min," Hyansu said, trying to keep the amazement out of his voice. "I am Captain Hyansu of the Galactic Council Fleet. We have come to investigate the results of your exile." Jae-min smiled, and it was not the desperate grin of a man barely surviving, but the confident expression of someone who was exactly where he belonged. "I figured you would show up eventually. Though I have to say you're a few years late. I was starting to think you had forgotten about me." "Forgotten?" Hyansu repeated, looking around at the impossible scene surrounding them. "This is not possible. Nothing survives on this planet." "Nothing?" "Builds civilizations here. The environmental reports clearly state that Kepler 442b is uninhabitable." "Your reports were wrong," Jae-min said simply. "Or rather, they were incomplete. This planet isn't uninhabitable. It's just uninhabitable for species that try to fight it instead of understanding it." He gestured to the shadow hunters moving through the area. "These creatures aren't mindless predators. They're intelligent beings with their own culture and social structure. The Stormwings aren't just flying death machines. They're highly evolved creatures with electrical abilities that can be used for communication and cooperation." Hyansu stared at him. "You're telling me that you've domesticated the most dangerous predators in the galaxy?" Domesticated? Jae-min shook his head. "That's the wrong word. I've learned to communicate with them, to work with them, to be part of their ecosystem instead of separate from it." He began walking toward the city, and Hyansu followed, unable to look away from the wonders around them. The buildings were unlike anything he had ever seen. They seemed to be alive, growing from the planet's surface in organic curves and spirals that defied conventional architecture. Plants covered the walls, but instead of damage, they seemed to strengthen the structures. Water flowed through channels carved into the streets, but it was clean and fresh, not the toxic sludge that was supposed to cover the planet. "How is this possible?" Hyansu whispered. "The Council sent thousands of exiles to this world over the centuries. None of them survived more than a few months, because they all made the same mistake." Jae-min explained. "They tried to impose their will on the planet instead of learning from it. They brought their own technology, their own assumptions, their own fears. They saw enemies everywhere, and enemies were what they found. They passed through the city's main gates, and Hyansu felt his worldview crumbling. The streets were filled with activity, but not the kind he expected. Shadow hunters moved through the area carrying tools and materials, working on construction projects and maintenance tasks. Stormwings perched on specially designed platforms, their electrical fields powering various devices and systems. And everywhere there were signs of advanced technology. Not just human engineering or alien science, but something new. A fusion of different approaches that created solutions neither species could have developed alone. power systems that use the planet's storms as a renewable energy source, communication networks that operated through bioelectrical signals, transportation systems that worked with the planet's gravitational fields instead of against them. This is impossible, Hyan-Su said again, but his voice lacked conviction. The Council's best scientists said this world could never support civilization. Your scientists were looking at the wrong data. Jae-min replied, they saw a death world. I saw a world with incredible potential that was being protected by its own defense mechanisms. Once I learned to work with those mechanisms instead of against them, everything changed. They reached the central plaza where a massive fountain, created from living crystal scent sprays of clean water into the air. The water caught the light from the electrical discharges of the storm wings above, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the organic architecture. The Council is not going to believe this, Hyan-Su said. They will think it's some kind of trick or illusion. Let them think what they want, Jae-min said. The evidence is all around you. I've built something here that your advanced civilizations said was impossible. I've created a partnership between species that your council claims can never work. He turned to face the hybrid captain directly. You have human blood in you. You understand what I'm talking about. Humans don't give up. We don't accept that something is impossible just because others say it is. We find a way. Hyan-Su felt something stirring in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or hope. His human heritage had always made him an outsider in Galactic Council society. Too emotional, they said, too unpredictable, too dangerous. But looking at what this one human had accomplished, he began to wonder if those traits were weaknesses or strengths. What do you want from the Council? He asked. Nothing, Jae-min said, and his answer surprised them both. I don't want to join your civilization. I don't want your recognition or your approval. I've built something better here. Something that works. He gestured to the city around them. This is what cooperation looks like. Not the kind of forced peace the Council maintains through fear and intimidation, but real partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. Then why are you showing me this? Jae-min smiled. Because change is coming whether the Council wants it or not. Other species are going to hear about what happened here. They're going to realize that there are alternatives to the Council's way of doing things. And when they do, they're going to want to see for themselves. He looked up at the storm clouds gathering overhead. This death world has become something new. A beacon of hope for anyone who has been told they don't fit in. A place where the impossible becomes possible. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's 1,000-year history. The great chamber buzzed with angry voices as representatives from 12 different species argued about what to do with the impossible. Reports coming from Kepler 442b, Captain Hyan-Su stood in the center of the circular chamber, trying to maintain his composure as alien dignitaries shouted questions and accusations at him. You expect us to believe that a single human has transformed a death world into a thriving civilization? Demanded Dexmar, his forearms gesturing wildly. This is obviously some kind of elaborate deception. I have visual recordings, Hyan-Su replied, holding up a data crystal. 3-dimensional scans detailed atmospheric readings, biological samples. The evidence is undeniable. The insectoid Zephyrian delegate clicked its mandibles in agitation. Evidence can be fabricated. Humans are known for their deceptive capabilities. What about the creatures? Asked Elder Sujin, the ancient crystalline representative whose body sparkled with internal light. Your reports claim that the Shadow Hunters and Stormwings are working alongside this human. Such cooperation is impossible. Hyan-Su activated a holographic display showing the streets of New Seoul. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as Shadow Hunters moved through the city carrying out complex tasks while Stormwings provided aerial support and communication. The creatures showed clear signs of intelligence and purpose that went far beyond simple animal behavior. This is what I saw with my own eyes, Hyan-Su said. The human has not conquered these creatures. He has learned to communicate with them, to work with them as equals. Impossible, roared War Chief Taewoo, the massive draconic representative. No species has ever achieved such cooperation. The Death World was designed to prevent exactly this kind of development. Maybe that's the problem, said a quiet voice from the observation gallery. All eyes turned to Ambassador Kang Ho, who had been forced to watch the proceedings from the visitors section. Maybe the Death World wasn't designed to kill. Maybe it was designed to test. Dexmar's eyes narrowed. You are not authorized to speak in these proceedings, human. Then authorize me, Kang Ho said, stepping forward. Because I think I understand what's happening here. Your Death World wasn't random. It was created by an ancient civilization that understood something you don't. And what is that? Elder Sujin asked, her crystalline form flickering with curiosity. That true strength comes not from domination but from cooperation. The ancient inhabitants of Kepler 442b didn't build their civilization by conquering the planet. They built it by becoming part of the planet's ecosystem. And when they were destroyed by aggressive visitors, they left behind a test. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. War Chief Taewoo was the first to speak. You're suggesting that the planet's hostility is artificial. A screening mechanism to prevent unworthy species from accessing advanced technology. I'm suggesting that Park Jae-min passed a test that thousands of other exiles failed. Kang Ho replied, and in doing so, he's proven that humanity deserves a place in the galactic community. He's proven that humanity is even more dangerous than we thought, Dexmar countered. If one human can achieve so much, what could a million humans do? What could a billion? The debate raged for hours with no clear consensus emerging. Some representatives, like Elder Sujin, argued that humanity had earned the right to join the galactic community. Others, like Dexmar, insisted that the human achievement only proved how dangerous the species was. The draconic delegation wanted to destroy the planet before the humans' innovations could spread. The Zephyrians demanded more investigation. Finally, Dexmar raised his hands for silence. We cannot reach agreement through debate. This matter requires a more direct approach. What do you propose? Asked Elder Sujin. A trial by combat? Dexmar announced, we will send our greatest champions to face this human. If he defeats them, then humanity will be granted full membership in the Galactic Council. If he fails, then Earth will be sterilized and his growing empire will be destroyed. The chamber erupted in discussion. Trial by combat was an ancient tradition that had not been used in centuries, but it was still legally binding under the old laws that governed the council. Who would serve as champions? Asked the Zephyrian delegate. Dexmar smiled coldly. I propose 3 trials. First, Valtar the Immortal, greatest warrior of the Villari Empire. Second, Zixmuth the Mindbreaker, the most powerful psychic entity in known space. Third, Crixin the World Killer, the cybernetic destroyer that has conquered entire star systems. Gasps echoed through the chamber. These were not just skilled fighters, but legends. Beings whose names were spoken in whispers across the galaxy. Valtar had never lost a battle in 3 centuries of warfare. Zixmuth could drive opponents insane with a single thought. Crixin had destroyed planets by turning their own technology against them. This is not a trial, protested Kang Ho. This is an execution, if your species is truly as remarkable as you claim. Dexmar replied, then your representative will find a way to survive, and if he refuses the challenge, then humanity will be judged as cowards and dealt with accordingly. War Chief Taewoo leaned forward. I support this proposal, but I suggest we make the trial public. Broadcast it across the galaxy so that all species can witness the true nature of humanity. Agreed, said Elder Sujin. If we are to make such a momentous decision, the galaxy should see the evidence for themselves. The vote was close, but the measure passed. Within hours, the challenge was being broadcast across known space. On 1,000 worlds, billions of beings learned that a single human had achieved the impossible and would now face the galaxy's greatest champions in mortal combat. On Kepler 442b, Park Jae-min received the transmission in his command center, surrounded by his unlikely allies. The Shadowhunter pack leaders chittered nervously as they sensed his tension. The Stormwing flight commanders crackled with electrical energy that reflected their agitation. So they want to test me, he said quietly. After 5 years of survival, they still don't believe what I've accomplished. He looked around at the creatures that had become his family and friends. These beings that the galaxy dismissed as mindless, predators had shown him more loyalty and cooperation than any civilized species had ever offered humanity. "Very well," he said. "If they want a demonstration of human capabilities, I'll give them one they'll never forget." The arena he built for the trials was a marvel of engineering that combined human ingenuity with alien technology and ancient wisdom. The floor was made from living crystal that could absorb and redirect energy. The walls were grown from the planet's own materials, creating a space that was both beautiful and functional. Above it all, the eternal storms of Kepler 442b provided a backdrop that spoke of the power and majesty of the world he had made his home. But the most remarkable feature of the arena was not its construction but its occupants. Shadow hunters moved through hidden passages ready to provide support if needed. Stormwings perched on specially designed platforms, their electrical fields creating a network of communication and power that connected every part of the structure. Even the deeper creatures from the planet's core had emerged to witness the trials. As the champions' ships approached the planet park, Jamin stood in the center of his arena and felt the weight of his species' future on his shoulders. But he was not alone. Around him stood representatives of a dozen different life forms, all united in purpose for the first time in the galaxy's history. "Let them come," he said to his assembled allies. "Let them see what happens when you underestimate the power of cooperation," the Shadow Hunters chit. The silence that followed Crixon's defeat was the loudest sound in galactic history. Across 1,000 worlds, billions of beings stared at their viewing screens, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The three greatest champions of the Galactic Council had been defeated by a single human and his impossible allies on a world that was supposed to be uninhabitable. In the council chamber on the capital world of Nexus Prime, the representatives sat in stunned disbelief. Vexmar's 4 hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his ceremonial chair. The mighty Velari leader who had orchestrated humanity's exile looked like he had aged a century in the span of a few hours. "This changes everything," whispered Elder Sujin, her crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated deep contemplation. "The human has proven that cooperation between species is not only possible but more powerful than any individual strength." War Chief Taewu slammed his massive fist on his desk. "This proves nothing except that we underestimated the human's cunning. He used trickery and deception to defeat our champions." "Did he?" asked the Zephyrian delegate, clicking its mandibles thoughtfully, "or did he demonstrate a form of warfare that we have never encountered before? Unity of purpose across multiple species." Ambassador Kang Ho stepped forward from the observation gallery, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. "Honored representatives, my species has fulfilled every requirement of your test. Park Jamin has survived on your death world for 5 years. He has built a thriving civilization. He has defeated your greatest champions. By the laws of the Council, humanity has earned the right to join the galactic community. The laws," Vexmar spoke slowly as if the words tasted bitter. "Yes, the ancient laws are clear. A trial by combat has been completed, and the human was victorious. The Council is bound by its own traditions." But before anyone could respond further, the chamber's communication systems activated, and a familiar voice filled the space. Park Jamin appeared as a 3-dimensional hologram standing in the center of the Council circle, surrounded by his alien allies. "Honored Council," he said with a respectful bow, "I thank you for the opportunity to prove humanity's worth. Your champions fought with great skill and courage. They have my respect even in defeat." "Human," Vexmar said, his voice strained, "you have won the right for your species to join our council. What are your terms for integration?" The answer that came surprised everyone, including Kang Ho, who thought he understood his fellow humans' intentions. "I decline your offer," Jamin said simply. "Humanity does not wish to join the Galactic Council." The chamber erupted in confused voices as representatives tried to understand what they were hearing. Elder Sujin was the first to find her voice. "You refuse membership, but why? You fought so hard to earn it." I fought to prove that humanity deserves respect, Jamin replied. But joining your council would mean accepting your way of doing things. Your system of governance through fear and intimidation. Your belief that some species are superior to others. I've seen a better way, he gestured to the creatures around him. Here on Kepler 442b, I've learned that true strength comes not from domination but from cooperation. Not from conquest but from understanding. I want to build something new. Something better. What are you proposing? Asked War Chief Tao, suspicion evident in his voice. The Free Worlds Alliance, Jamin announced. A new kind of galactic organization based on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation. Any species that has been marginalized, excluded, or oppressed by the current system will be welcome to join us. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. For centuries, they had maintained power by keeping smaller species divided and dependent. The idea of a rival organization that offered an alternative to their authority was their worst nightmare. You cannot simply create a competing government, Dexmar protested. The Council has authority over all civilized space, does it? Jamin asked. Your authority comes from the consent of the governed? What happens when species stop consenting? What happens when they find a better option? Before the Council could respond, the Chamber's communication systems activated again. This time the signals came from dozens of different worlds simultaneously. Representatives of minor species that had been ignored or suppressed by the Council began announcing their intention to withdraw from the organization and join the new alliance. The mineral worlds, whose resources had been exploited for centuries, declared their independence. The agricultural colonies that had been forced to sell their food at below-market prices announced their withdrawal. Even some of the client species of major powers began questioning their allegiance to the Council system. This is rebellion, roared War Chief Taewoo. We should crush this uprising before it spreads further. With what? Asked Elder Sujin. Our greatest champions have been defeated. Our most powerful weapons have proven ineffective against this new form of cooperation. How do you fight an idea whose time has come? Over the following months, the galaxy watched in amazement as the Free Worlds Alliance grew from a single planet to a coalition that spanned dozens of star systems. Refugees from the Council's authoritarian rule flocked to Alliance worlds where they found something that had been missing from galactic civilization for centuries. Hope. The Alliance offered a different model of governance based on voluntary association and mutual benefit rather than hierarchy and exploitation. Member worlds retained their sovereignty while working together on projects that benefited all participants. Technology and knowledge were shared freely rather than hoarded by the powerful. Most importantly, the Alliance proved that species cooperation was not just possible but profitable. Alliance worlds experienced rapid economic growth as trade barriers fell and resources were shared efficiently. Scientific advancement accelerated as researchers from different species worked together on common problems. Even the arts flourished as different cultural traditions merged and evolved. Kepler 442b became the unofficial capital of this new civilization, serving as both a symbol of what was possible and a practical demonstration of interspecies cooperation. The Death World had been transformed into a garden where beings from dozens of different species lived and worked together in harmony. Park Jamin found himself reluctantly thrust into the role of Alliance leader, though he insisted on the title of coordinator rather than president or emperor. His approach to leadership was as revolutionary as everything else about the Alliance. Instead of issuing orders from above, he facilitated cooperation between different groups and helped resolve conflicts through dialogue and compromise. But perhaps his greatest achievement was proving that the galaxy's most dangerous species could also be its most cooperative. Human colonies throughout Alliance space became models of integration where different species worked together as equals rather than competitors. The shadow hunters of Kepler 442b became ambassadors to other worlds, teaching their unique approach to collective problem-solving. The Stormwings served as a communication network linking Alliance worlds across vast distances through their electrical abilities. Even the ancient technology buried beneath the planet's surface was gradually awakened and shared with species that had proven themselves worthy of its power. The Galactic Council still existed, but its influence waned as more and more species chose the alliance model over the traditional system of hierarchy and exploitation. Some council members like Elder Sujin eventually defected to the alliance, bringing with them knowledge and resources that accelerated its growth. Others like Vexmar remained bitter opponents, plotting ways to destroy the upstart organization and restore the old order. But their efforts were hampered by the simple fact that the alliance offered something the council could not: a future where all species could prosper together instead of fighting for scraps from the table of the powerful. Captain Hyun-Soo became one of the alliance's most effective recruiters, using his hybrid heritage to bridge the gap between human and alien perspectives. His first-hand account of Jaemin's transformation of the Death World became required reading in alliance schools and inspired a generation of young beings to believe that cooperation was not just possible but preferable to competition. Years later, as Park Jae-min stood on the observation deck of New Seoul, watching ships from a dozen different species landing at the spaceport he had built from the wreckage of crashed exile vessels, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The Galactic Council had sent him to Kepler 442b to die as a lesson to humanity about the price of defying their authority. Instead, he had built something that proved their entire worldview was wrong. The Death World had become a beacon of life and hope. The exile had become a liberator. The test designed to demonstrate humanity's unworthiness had instead revealed the Council's own moral bankruptcy. The galaxy would never be the same because one human had refused to accept that cooperation was impossible. He had taken the worst punishment the universe could devise and transformed it into the foundation of a better future for all sentient beings. In the end, they had indeed sent one human to a death world, and now he owned it. But more than that, he had given it freely to anyone willing to work together for the common good. The death world had become a world of infinite possibility, and its human coordinator had proven that sometimes the greatest victor